I would like to welcome you to this special event this afternoon, where I have the pleasure of welcoming Professor Tom Shakespeare from the University of East Anglia, who will be joined by UNSW's Dr Eduardo Sandoval and Associate Professor Gemma Carey to discuss the opportunities and threats of robotics in the disability care sector. I am Rosemary Case. I'm the Interim Director of the Disability Innovation Institute here at UNSW, and I'd like to begin by acknowledging the medical people who are the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Island people who are here joining us today. This event is hosted by the Disability Innovation Institute in partnership with the UNSW Grand Challenges, a Grand Challenge on Living with 21st Century Technology. The Disability Innovation Institute conducts whole of university interdisciplinary research in partnership with people with disability. And I'd like to acknowledge our partners from the community sector that have joined us today. It's good to see you here, and hopefully this is the beginning of lots more opportunities for us to work together. Currently, UNSW scholars are working on world-class disability applied innovative research in areas such as social robotics and artificial intelligence, smart communities and environments. This research has the potential to provide accessible and inclusive solutions in providing urban transport, education and health and disability care services. The Institute seeks to influence world disability scholarship, providing thought leadership to the challenges and opportunities in the global area. The UNSW Grand Challenge program has been established to facilitate critical discussions on the biggest issues facing humanity, and in the process raise awareness of the groundbreaking research and excellent initiatives undertaken by UNSW academics, staff and students. We have a fantastic panel assembled for you today, which will be chaired by Associate Professor Gemma Carey, the Research Director for the Centre of Social Impact here at UNSW. Gemma has investigated processes joining up within government and between government and non-government organisations. Her current research focuses on the design and implementation of the Australian National Disability Insurance Scheme and the challenges of quasi-markets in the area of disability. In addition to her academic research, she runs a policy forum, The Power to Persuade, which is aimed at improving the relationships between policymakers, academics, and the community sector. I'm delighted to welcome our chair, Gemma Carey.
Thank you, Rosemary. And thank you to the Disability Innovations Institute for hosting such a great event. So when we talk about robots, we tend to think about sci-fi movies and this kind of futuristic technology that doesn't exist yet, but one day maybe it will. But actually, robots are all around us. Chances are if you used a smartphone today or your credit card, a robot played a role in manufacturing one of those products and facilitated you doing this. In health and social care, robots and AI as well are rapidly advancing and becoming further embedded in the delivery of those services, but also our day-to-day lives. Robots can make a really positive impact on the ways that we live our lives, and this is no different for people with a disability. But this doesn't mean there isn't also the potential for harm and a whole host of ethical questions that we need to work through when we're adopting new technologies. So today we're going to discuss the good and the bad of robotics and what it might mean for the disability sector broadly, and then also specifically for people who have a disability. So, some introductions. Professor Tom Shakespeare is here from the UK. I understand he's pretty well flown here twice in the last week, having to turn around and go back and then come back again. Tom completed his PhD at the University of Cambridge. He's worked at the University of Sunderland, Newcastle, Leeds, and University of East Anglia, teaching and researching in sociology. He's the author of Disability Rights and Wrongs and co-author of The Sexual Politics of Disability. He spent 5 years at the WHO, where he was co-author and co-editor of the World Report on Disability. And in the UK, he's founded several large disability people's organisations. We also have UNSW's own Eduardo Sandoval. He's a social robots researcher at UNSW, and his work spans different aspects of social robots, such as reciprocity in human-robot interaction, robots in education, robots in fiction. And then beyond traditional robotics, there's also a growing interest, and here's a growing interest, in the designing machines that are capable of meaningful social interactions with humans. Eduardo's work incorporates insights from behavioural economics and social psychology in order to explore a different approach to social robots. So we're going to hand first to you, Tom, or is it to
I think
Eduardo?
Were you going to go first? Yeah.
Over to you.
Okay. So, should I start?
Yes.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you so much for the invitation, guys. I'm really glad to be here and share some thoughts about what I'm doing in my research. Firstly, I would like to introduce. Yeah, I should use this one. Here's it. Okay. This is me. I'm a little bit crazy about robots since I was a kid. So fictional robots had a bit impact in my life, and that's why I'm research in this area. And certainly fiction has some impact in the research that I'm performing here and before in other universities, as Bellevue University and Canterbury University in New Zealand. The main topics, as Gemma mentioned it, in my research are reciprocity in human-robot interaction. In other words, how people take decisions towards robots in terms of the rationale behind these decisions. But I'm moving on to another topics a little bit more broad in social terms, which I call it meaningful machines. In other words, I want to do robots that are not gizmos, robots that are not just for sailing, robots that are not for rich kids, which will use it for 1 year or 2, and this is one of the first traits that we can see in this area. Connected to this topic as well, I want to investigate addiction to technology. These two topics are very close to each other because we need machines to have a better performance in the world, generally speaking, right? But to what extent we can use these machines in order to avoid addiction to them? And the first example that we have around is social media, right? Like when it's healthy to use it and when it's not healthy to use it. There's a very, very not well-known threshold about that. And besides this research that I'm developing, and I still will develop in the future, is designing robots. So I have been involved in the design of several robots, some of them low-tech, some others a little bit more high-tech. This is the expertise that I can present to you guys today about what I will talk later on over the projects that we are developing in the Creative Robotics Lab here in UNSW. So, generally speaking, we have several types of disability, and also we have several types of high-tech solutions for different cognitive disabilities, developmental disabilities, intellectual disabilities, mental and physical and sensory disabilities. So there are a world of products and research for disability, but not necessarily all of them are the perfect solution or the most suitable solution for the needs of people with certain kinds of disability. And just to put a little bit of context, this is a report of the International Federation of Robotics, and we can see that the numbers in terms of how many robots have been sold in the world per region in different categories, we can see that medical robots have increasing numbers in the same way that powered human exoskeletons and other professional service robots not specified above, which means there is not a special category for robots in disability. So I guess also it's a first thought that comes to my mind that probably we should create a category, a special category for this kind of robotics, because generally speaking, in this research area, we have several robots, we have many robots, but we need design specifically robots for disability, probably one function or one purpose robot dedicated to specific problems and for specific people. So after this context, I would like to talk about what projects we have been doing in the Creative Robotic Labs. This project, for instance, it has been performed by Scott Brown before I arrived to UNSW. So he has been working with robots and autists with positive results. He's using this robot and it made in UK in order to offer some therapy for autism. In situations where the child may have limited social or communicative skills and was not yet ready for interaction with a human peer. Apparently, in social robotics, we have good results using robots for this kind of therapy. I have been not involved directly with this problem, but as far as I know, now robots or Casper robots have been providing these results and in terms of research. Probably the next step is try to standardize and try to commercialize and try to make this technology more viable for the people. Another approach that Scott Brown have developed in his research and his PhD is working with tangible interfaces, interactive tangible interfaces. These interfaces worked with a small group of autistic and neurotypical children to look at how responsive environment could be used to encourage social engagement between children and their parents. So in this case, the approach is technology as a media, as a mediator of a human-human interaction, which is not necessarily social robotics, but another approach that could be useful in the future. Let's see when Scott Brown finishes his research and present results, what we can see about this new approach. And then I can talk about my own projects, right? So I can talk a lot about them. So one of the projects that I have been involved with directly is the development of a robot lifter for nurses in hospitals. But thanks for the input of Rosemary and other people, we think that we can move this project to another applications. The thing is, work injuries in Mexico, my homeland, are very present in hospitals. Imagine 1.5 meters, a nurse trying to lift a patient that is 120 kilograms, all right? So as far as we know, the national report says that 48% of work injuries are back injuries. So all these people require some assistance, and we think that a robot lifter could be the perfect assistance because that avoids repetitive tasks, tasks that requires a lot of physical effort, and then also have an impact in financial terms for the hospital and a benefit in the health of the workers in the hospital. And we choose firstly hospitals because it's a standardized environment. So hospitals have standards and they are pretty much the same infrastructure all around the world, ideally. So we think that if we can test this technology in a hospital, then the next step could be probably move the technology, the social robot, into the homes of people. We didn't try homes first because of the technical limitations. Houses are a very complex environment for robots. Even if you use the best technology on them, like artificial vision or algorithms for localization, it's still a very big challenge, technical challenge. So, but step by step, we can start with hospitals and see how we can move the robot there. So in this robot, we are using several, or we are experimenting with several interfaces. We are doing gesture reading, and we also are trying with a new interface based in EEG, electroencephalographic signals, and but used with eyes. So the problem is electroencephalographic signals are very, they are not reliable yet. But using blinking eyes, movements in the eyes, we can do a better reading of the signals, and we can control the robot with more accuracy. Another project, I have very limited time to talk about the project, sorry, so I will rush a little bit. It's a conversational robot to conduct therapeutic interventions for dementia. I made this project as well with a very famous research institute in Mexico, in the north of Mexico, nearby Tijuana and San Diego, called CICESE. So this is a chatbot using a homemade robot, but the chatbot has the resources coming from the APIs of IBM, and we are developing personalized conversations in order to have therapeutic effects in the patients. Yeah, I can talk further about this project later. And we have also other projects in the Creative Robotics Lab that are not directly related with disability, but they are basic science and basic research that could be used in the future, like artificial sensitive skin that provides possibilities for new interfaces, and reasoning about action with formal context that provides basic research for development of chatbots, all the cultural aspects of the development of robot embodiments and so on. So you can see our website and you can see more information about that. So closing my intervention here is opportunity or threat. From my point of view, I can say that we have all these robots in the world, but none of them is specifically designed for disability. So probably we can put some effort on that, so we can design a specific purpose robots for disability and make them available for the public. However, as AC/DC says, it's a long way to the top if you want to develop robots for disability. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's wonderful. I love working with technologists and scientists, and I want to start by saying that I think these sorts of developments, this sort of research is very, very exciting. But you've already heard that I turned back. The flight got nearly to Singapore and turned back. And why was that? That was because the warning light went on the dashboard of the plane. There was a problem with one of the engines. They didn't know what it was. They closed it down and they drove us home. And so for me, I don't know whether they have AI on a plane sensor system, but it's an indication that technology doesn't always work. There may have been nothing wrong with that plane. It might have got us there absolutely fine, but we didn't know. And that's a warning. I'll tell you another story, also a transport story. I've been schlepping around Sydney by taxi, and I had a fantastic taxi driver yesterday, really wonderful, warm human being. Not Australian in origin, but that's a coincidence. And he was telling me about all his clients, most of whom had disability, and how he drove them around. And he said many of them were aging, and now he went to many funerals. And he still saw the families of the people that he'd worked with, and he waved at them in the street. He said, sometimes I know more about these people than the families themselves. For example, he said, I had a lady, she'd had a child by a French soldier many years before. The family didn't know anything about this. And she asked me after she died to tell the family about this half-sibling, which I did. And 6 months later, he turned up, but they were forewarned that he existed and the social interaction went better. So we were also talking about self-driving cars. And he was asking me whether I thought self-driving cars would ever come to fruition. These are robotics. And obviously, a taxi driver is quite interested in that question because it's going to do them or their subsequent generations of taxi drivers out of work. But what I'm asking you here is, would you invite a self-driving car to the funeral of your loved one? Would you confide in a self-driving car about your illegitimate child? This gentleman was playing a social service. He was a taxi driver, but he was a social, spiritual, emotional service for the people with whom he worked. Let's not forget that. So, This is, I've made a mistake on this slide. This is actually CRPD Article 19, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, Article 19, so blame jet lag. But this is about the right of all disabled people to live in the community, choices equal to others. Section B, access to a full range of in-home, residential and other community support services, including personal assistance necessary to support living and inclusion in the community and to prevent isolation or segregation from the community. So please hold on to that. It doesn't mention robotics. Maybe we're going to have to rewrite the CRPD to include new technologies. There is other space in the CRPD which does talk about technology, but I want to focus on that to prevent isolation or segregation from the community. That's really important, so hold on to that. So we love assistive technologies, disabled people. We use them all the time. I don't want to single out Rosemary, but we're all, we've got hearing aids, we've got communication software, we love the internet, we've got wheelchairs that can do all sorts of things that you can only dream of. And we are actually the cutting edge, because stuff that's developed for us today will be used for the masses tomorrow. And one example is audiobooks. Audiobooks were driven by disabled people who had visual impairment. I remember back in the day putting a tape from RNIB for my grandfather in the envelope to post back to RNIB, and I remember he'd been reading or listening to Mansfield Park. Now, everybody takes audiobooks for granted. So we actually play a really important service in the world of technology. So cochlear implants, screen readers, magnifiers, environmental controls to operate our houses, mostly things that we control, sometimes tracking devices for people with dementia or other cognitive impairments, so you can see where they are and they can perhaps be stopped from harming themselves. So these are really, really important. I just wanted to say one thing I learned this morning. I was with a friend from the Aboriginal community, and he was talking about a wonderful, wonderful piece of research he's done with Aboriginal people in rural and remote areas in particular, but the whole community. And he was saying when he first turned up to talk to folk, they didn't really want to talk to him. And he didn't know why that was. And the reason is because he wears hearing aids, big, bulky hearing aids over his ears. And they thought he was a copper, because he had some sort of communication device. They didn't want to talk to a guy in a suit who came from the city wearing these communication devices. He might have been a plant. He might have been somebody to detect what they were up to. And he had to show them, take them off. I'm deaf, mate. I need these to communicate with you, at which point they welcomed him with open arms. So I'm telling you that story with his permission to show that cultures react to assistive technologies in lots of different ways. We cannot predict that. That was a surprise to me. But it was entirely sensible from the point of view of Aboriginal people in rural and remote areas for whom the police are often the enemy. So we need to be sensitive to those cultural differences and sensitivities and thoughts about how things may turn out. And it's about the social context. And the social context actually says that what Eduardo and other people are developing fills potentially a need. We are aging. Even Australia is aging, but particularly European countries are aging. Now, in 1995, there was 101 million older people in Europe. In 2050, there'll be 173 million. In that time, sorry, I've got another glitch on my thing. In that time, the working age population will fall by 25%. So we've got more older people and fewer younger people who are able to support them. So that is a fact. What can we do about that? Well, at the same time, and rightly, women are working more, and women historically have borne the brunt of caring. So there are more older people, fewer younger people, fewer women who are homemakers, willing and able to support older people. So we have a big issue. And we could solve it by having more migrants. We could open our arms to people and say, come, do this work with us. But at the same time, there's a populist backlash against immigration in my country, in Germany, in Eastern Europe, and I think in Australia also. So we cannot solve this problem because we have a huge potential shortfall in carers. And so we need to solve this somehow. And this is a social problem, and we could solve it in different ways. But one of the ways that's proposed, as we know, is robotics, socially interactive robots. And I have to confess, I've not experienced any of these directly myself, but there's the robot Pepper, which is, I think, a humanoid, which is care and entertainment. There's Paro, which is a small robot. I'll show you in a minute. It's a kind of seal, a cuddly seal, particularly for people with dementia. And there's been some research here, and the evidence is that it improves communication, improves mood, reduces depression, reduces loneliness. So this works, at least in the studies that have been performed. Paro works. It ticks the boxes. It achieves what we'd hope it would achieve. And there's lots of others, Nakoro, Aibo, Bandit, often in animal forms, which is interesting. Let's go back to that. I see an assistance animal in the room, but we're going to do him out of business or her out of business. And these are often about, these are often about mimicking social interaction. They're playing the roles of the dog or the human, where those might not be available. And so here's a picture of Paro, I think at a trade fair. This is a picture of a couple of seals, and you can come and stroke, and they'll do the wiggly thing. And what's interesting to me is that these technologies have been particularly important in Japan. And I was in Japan a few years ago, and I took a personal assistant. This is soon after I became paralyzed. And I'm just showing you, this is Coffee Boss. And he was very excited about Coffee Boss, because the voiceover for Coffee Boss was done by an American actor, and they were pretty cool. And this is a coffee dispensing machine. And in Australia and in England, and America and everywhere, we generally have a barista producing our coffee. And that's really important for us. But in Japan, as we know, the rules of social interaction are very rigid and stressful. Interaction with other human beings is stressful in Japan in a way that it isn't here. Here you just go, no worries, and you're okay. In Britain you say, terrible weather, and you're okay. Although people don't know what to say now because it's sunny all the time and we're absolutely lost. All we can talk about is our miserable football team. So this is Coffee Boss. And I'm showing this because it's about the fact that these technologies have often developed in Japan, where there is a culture which, because of the stress of social interaction, you want to interact with a machine. So that's why we don't get those coffee machines in Australia and Britain, because we like interacting with people, it's not stressful. But in Japan, it's stressful, and people would far rather buy their hot coffee out of a machine, sorry, I've gone too far, like this one. So that's why those are prevalent there and not here, and that's why I think in Japan has been a big driver of these robotics. It's a place with far more older people living longer, particularly in rural areas where there are very few younger people and a lot of older people, fewer care workers, because there's a huge hostility to immigration. There are very, very few immigrants in Japan. So, and you've got obviously a history of technological sophistication. So all of those add up to a strong driver for the development of social and interactive robots. So, I mean, that's just sort of culturally and sociologically interesting. So what do we think about all of this? There isn't a lot of research, and this is a really important area. I'm really glad that Eduardo and others here are researching it. There isn't a lot of research, but what there is seems to suggest, particularly in Japan, that it's been so far positive. But, Paro is not going to support you, look after you. It may entertain you briefly, it may relieve the carer slightly, but it's not the solution, because they've only ever been used in the context of care relationships, support relationships. So it's not as if, in these cases, people just go and leave you. You are there with your carer or support worker with this, what you could call an entertaining gadget. But the second point, which is more important, is that what people aspire to, remember my taxi driver, remember his clients, is connection. They aspire to relationship, real human relationships. And it's to people being companionate, to sometimes challenge them, conversation, affection, reciprocation, status. You know, they want that equality. That's what disabled people want. And it's very interesting because I've done a lot of research about personal assistance, human personal assistance. And at the start of the disability rights movement, the disability community said, we want tasks, not emotion. We want to pay somebody to do stuff for us, to empower us, yeah? But what we found in our research is that's not true. Every support relationship is a relationship. And the social side of it, the companion side of it, is just as important as getting the task done. And that's why we studied how that relationship can go better and can go worse. We want the worker to be happy and the disabled person to be happy, and that depends on a good relationship between them. So that's instructive. It's not just a matter of getting tasks done. I think that, you know, we have got at the moment a demographic bulge. We've got more old people and fewer younger people. But that's going to change. It's like a sort of football or a melon going through the python. We will get, I think, an equalization in terms of, sorry, I don't know if that's me or, see, the gadget. We will get, it may be a temporary problem. We may now have a problem of a shortfall of care workers, but we may not always have that problem. That's one thing to bear in mind. The other thing is that we are in economies which are transitioning from industrial manual production to service economy. But it's also an opportunity. We can retrain people. We can change our workforce slowly but surely to be more appropriate for the sort of service-dominated workforce we need. And finally, I think, and this comes out of the research we did with personal assistants, I think there's an issue, a problem. Because in order to automate something, you need to basically break it down into simple tasks. So when you break things down into separate tasks, which is simple tasks, which is what you need to do to automate them, you possibly are leading to a devaluing of care itself. Once something can be done by a robot, we may not value it in the same way. And so I think this is really significant. What we need to be doing in today's world is to value support, is to value community, is to overcome individualism. And yet, the very simplification involved in automation may undermine that and lead us to not think that those tasks, those activities, those relationships are important. And so I think we've got a warning there. I mean, it might happen the other way. I don't know. It may be that if we get the robots to do the simple tasks, we will free up time to do the more complex, interesting tasks. That might be the case. But the evidence is from, for example, domestic technology, hoovers, washing machines, dishwashers. They were all meant to free up time, but they haven't. They really haven't. So I think that Eduardo is right, that we need to look at the social and cultural framing within which these robotics are both developed, deployed, used, because that is up to us. It's up to us, to our families, communities, and governments, and these are the key questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you both. So you've heard from Eduardo, who's at the front line of developing new technologies and robots for disability specifically. And Tom has rightly pointed out that actually disability drives technological innovation for everybody else. But there are also some social issues. So how will robots change the value we put on care? What's going to happen to the workforce? And what do we potentially lose when a robot comes in and does the role of a person? So we're going to open up to questions, but I might first give you a chance, Eduardo, to speak to some of the issues that Tom raised.
Yeah, right. Thank you, Gemma. I agree with many things that Tom said. I would like to make emphasis on that robots give us the opportunity to unleash human potential. People is worried about lose job positions and so on. But to be honest, this is not the first time in the history that happens, you know. A lot of manual work, a lot of repetitive work has been relegated to machines. And this is not exception, this is the next revolution. So I guess social technologies, new interfaces, social robotics will give us the opportunity to be more creative, to socialize better, to improve our human skills. But in order that that happens, we need to attract more social scientists to this area. We need more psychologists in this area. We need more sociologists in this area. Because to be honest, I'm very skeptical with my Japanese colleagues and the results. Japan is a boot camp for new technologies. They have specific conditions that shape the technologies that they appear every year there. They have crazy things there. Like I remember when I was there, they have a mobile phone with a projector 10 years ago. And it's like, why we need a mobile phone with a tiny projector that projects just 12 inches, right? But they have it. And the problem, what I see in my Japanese colleagues is that they are engineers performing social and psychological research. And this is something that in the Creative Robotics Lab we try to avoid. We want people from all the disciplines contributing to this field, which is fascinating. You know, when you put designers and sociologists and psychologists and engineers and computer scientists working together in the same physical place, it's just amazing. The outcomes are really, really, really good. Another point that I would like to highlight is, again, we have high expectations over social robots. It's a long way in order to make them real partners, real social interaction. My personal experience with robots, particularly with kids, for instance, is that the robot is attractive and it's really cute and they like it for 2 minutes. They lose all the interest on it. And it's because the way that we design the interactions is just not about technology, it's how we keep the interest of the user in that. So one possible solution for that is gamification, as one of the things that I want to use in my future research. Yeah, summarizing, we need better research, more researchers in this field in order to make shorter periods of development to have a viable technology for consumer, for the final customer. What can I add to this?
Great.
Work? Thank you.
We might open up to the floor if you've got questions for Tom or Eduardo or both, or perhaps you want to ask Eduardo how he can go work in his robotics lab.
Yes.
Graham.
I obviously use a guide dog, so I'm using an animal. I'm desperate to get the robot to replace it. And people will say, oh, but isn't it lovely to have the dog? Well, you take it out to the bathroom at 6 o'clock in the morning. You feed it every day, you know, you groom it, you do all the things that you have to do. So my first question is, are either of you aware of research in that area and progress in that area? And the second thing I'd like to do is challenge a couple of your assertions, Tom, towards the end of your presentation, in terms of saying that, and I agree with a lot of what you said, but in terms of saying that things like washing machines and dishwashers and stuff like that haven't progressed us in terms of, you know, getting things done and having more time. I mean, I use the dishwasher and the washing machine in our house. I know I have more time than if I had to do those tasks manually and without using them. But I'm not looking for, and I'm not claiming to be representative of all people with disabilities, but I'm not looking for companionship from robots. I'm looking for a robot that can provide me with orientation, with mobility, that can tell me the shops that I'm walking past in case I might want to pop in and do all of those sorts of things. So it seems to me that there's a diverse range of needs and that not all of them are represented by the sort of companionship and relationship in a caring situation that you talk about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you're right, Graham. And, you know, I did start by welcoming what technology could offer. And as somebody who is cognitively pretty challenged, the use of direction finding in my car is fantastic. I don't need to remember the route anymore. It'll just tell me. And there are many, many uses of that, online banking and all the rest of it. So yeah, I welcome all those things, and I could imagine for a visually impaired person having something, clipped on your ear, which would say you're passing the bank, move 2 steps to the left because there's a pram coming towards you, or whatever it would be tremendously liberating. I completely accept that some people are looking for companionship and some people are just looking for tasks. But I still do worry that a lot of this individualizes us. And so, for example, I don't go to the bank ever anymore. I do it all online. I never talk to the bank clerk. I don't have a relationship with the bank manager. And in the old days, you did. And maybe that was inconvenient, but it was part of the pattern, the sort of social capital, the network of relationships that you had. And I worry that we're going to lose something as well as gain something. And I think we should be alert to what we might lose and think about ways that we might replace it. It may be that it's not about banking. It may be that I find connection in other ways, but I can't eliminate connection from my life, and we should be alert to the dangers of it.
Can I add something? In terms of task versus companion, definitely we can see cultural differences between Western and Japan, for instance. Comes to my mind the research from Elizabeth Broadbent. She has 16 paros, so her office is full of fluffy, cute robots all around, and she uses it in resting houses and so on. And the results that she presents is that people is not very keen to use them. Again, it's this thing about attention to the robot and interest over the robot. And so they say, yeah, it's cute and so on, but then what else can I do? And then some of the participants said, oh, stupid robot, I don't want to use it. Literally, they say that. And if you compare with the Japan results, you see there is something different here. It's different people, different needs. What is the right level that we can achieve in terms of design of social robots? We don't know. We don't know yet. But maybe we can follow the example of the development of smartphones, Smartphones are not culturally adapted to each country or to each population, a special population. They are just one technology that people adapt to them. Not sure if that could happen in social robotics, but maybe it's a shoot that we can take. Try to have a platform that can do both things in the right way.
So will there be a guide dog replacement?
As far as I know, in terms of robots, no. But I know experiments about stimuli in the optical nerves that allows to see some spots of light with a special devices in front of connecting with the optical nerve. But that works with partial vision, right? So you should have certain degree of vision. But in terms of a companion robot able for that, no, as far as I know. But maybe it's a worthy idea to develop. I guess, early prototypes can be developed using these vacuum cleaners that we have at home. They have reasonable good localization systems. They are reasonable good in terms of adapting to the environment around them. So probably it's working about the interface that could be used between the user and the robot. So, but yeah, it's a good idea. Probably we should try to do some prototype, some paper and something like that.
It's interesting, isn't it, the different contexts. In Africa, I see visually impaired older members of the community, and they walk around with their hand on their probably grandchild or great-grandchild. And obviously that is both liberating, but it's also confining, presumably, for the great-grandchild. But it does also create an intergenerational relationship, which might be important and valuable. So I just think, as Eduardo says, that we need to think sociologically and psychologically to be open to the possibilities, but also to realize what else might change as a result.
I have a question for the whole panel. Just in thinking about the ways that we as a culture consider the possibilities of technology and what it can do for us. It's my sense that we use our existing mental models to translate what's possible. And I'm interested in the idea that it's possible that robots or other forms of technology might actually be able to provide domains of support that we don't know about yet because they're not human. And I'm wondering if either of you have thought much about that.
This is a very interesting question that I discussed with my colleagues recently. Usually when we develop social robots, we use the model human-human interaction. Sometimes we use the model animal-human interaction, but it's less often. And yeah, you are totally right. Our mental models are rigid, so we are thinking as a humans, of course, we are humans, but we need to explore different approaches, I reckon. It's worthy. It's really worthy because all the developments in artificial intelligence, deep learning, even embodiment of the robots, we can see this sense of anthropomorphism in the development of these models. Like we see a human model and we just directly try to implement it. But yeah, definitely.
And I suppose one example of that is back to mobile phones and text messaging. And I don't believe it was ever considered by developers of mobile phones that text messaging would take off and be the connective means that it is. And when we get text messages or emails or these other online or mobile phone communications, it's a different sort of thing, as we know, to a phone message or to a letter. It's creating a new possibility. It's creating a new demand because anybody who works has an inbox full of unanswered emails. So it causes us stress. It changes our working life. So it's both liberating and confining in ways that we didn't conceive of. We had no idea, and it fulfills sometimes a totally different role in our lives. So I think you're right. I think there will be unimagined possibilities, but also unimagined threats. It's going to be a bit of both.
So I have a question about mainstream technology. So I guess the opportunity of threat is a legit or topical debate, even just in anyone. So I guess that whether we like it or not, the mainstream technology is progressing every day. So, and talking about inclusion and disability inclusion, so is there any work in this area of pushing more user experience with people with disability in the designing of mainstream technologies?
I mean, it's certainly the case that accessibility features and things like Microsoft and other technologies are there in ways that they've never been before. So I do think, the notion of reasonable accommodation, the notion of universal design should suggest that all of these technologies can be developed to include, the needs of as many users as possible. And by being so flexible, don't disable us, but enable us. We're not excluded, we're included. And in theory, that's brilliant and it should work, and often it does work. But we also know that, for example, touchscreen technology has been terrible for visually impaired people. So it was developed by people who didn't give a monkeys for the fact that a section of the population would never be able to use this. So, you have both very positive stories and horror stories, and that's why it's really important for the voices of disabled people to be heard. And there are initiatives to try and make, websites accessible or try and, for example, if you're a white-collar worker, you probably are recruited through an online recruitment system. And we still have not solved the problem that online recruitment systems are appalling for visually impaired and people with dexterity problems. So it's kind of a no-brainer, but it's still a problem. So I would say that mainstream applications have the potential to include, but frequently exclude.
That it's not that they probably don't give a monkeys, it's probably they couldn't even conceive that there would be people that wouldn't be able to use touchscreens. In their concept of the human condition, of course everybody can poke their finger at a screen.
Can I add something to your question? Probably you are a designer, right? I guess I can talk just specifically about my research field, and I'm very critical about my own research field, social robotics. In the way that we develop research is very, I can say a little bit old school. We research for one variable, for one specific group, let's say, citizens in Sydney from UNSW, 50, 60, 120 participants, just insulated in an experimental room, not into the wild. And of course, that is not inclusive, right? It's just to have an answer about what happens in this variable under these conditions. So that's why I'm inviting people from social science, from psychology, from people with other expertise to help us to perform better research. Because otherwise we will take longer to implement social robotics in the mainstream development of technology.
I have one more point. I've got to get the plug in. This is what we see the Institute doing, bringing people with disability into the research design phase of emerging technologies, into the research and design phase of emerging policy, law, medicines, the whole gambit, that people with disability are conceived as part of the human condition, and that what we, through our knowledge exchange, is developing research for the wider community that's informed by the whole community.
Take it over.
Thanks, Rosemary. My name is Anthony. I'm from Indonesia. I'm a PhD student at School of Social Sciences, UNSW. So it's really interesting. Technology is indeed really helpful, and to me, like this power chair has been really helping me a lot during my study here in Australia. But I think we might have forgotten that technology for disability especially tends to be really, really expensive. And not all people with disability, especially those living in the global south or developing countries, can access technology. Maybe in the future we need to think about technology that is cheap and accessible for all people with disability in the whole world to use, and they can access them at an affordable price, I think. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely, no question about it. And as we develop, for example, more and more expensive, I don't know, the iBot chair, which can go upstairs and downstairs and raise you to eye level height and all the rest of it. And you think that one of these chairs costs $30,000 or $40,000, and you think, well, most people in the world are living on $1 a day or whatever it might be. So this is clearly inaccessible. And I think that we need to think about technologies. Some technologies are never going to be replicable by everybody. Like even with Elon Musk, we're not going to go to the moon or Mars. That's an inaccessible technology. But other and back in the day, they thought we'd all be living on Mars by now. But other technologies do become distributed and widespread. And in the past, they thought there'd only be a need for 6 computers or whatever it is. And now we have more power in our mobile phones than they had to send that rocket to the Mars or to the moon. So we can't really predict what is going to fly and what is not going to fly. And unit costs come down. And when I work in Africa, I haven't worked in Malaysia, but when I work in Africa, all the adults I work with have a mobile phone and a smartphone. And that has completely leapfrogged landline technology and is a huge, whatever it is, transformational technology in Africa. And I never anticipated that. I certainly didn't expect it. And yet here it is. Everybody's got a smartphone. So some technologies do get out there. And the question is, can we make the technologies that liberate disabled people, those mass transformational technologies that can really be produced at low cost and available to everybody? I don't know. I think it's very interesting to see how the wheelchair goes. With Chinese manufacture, Chinese manufacturer of bicycles makes them cheap and cheap. And we're trying to get wheelchair manufacture in the same way. So that instead of this wheelchair costs £2,000, we're trying to get wheelchairs which cost $15. And let's see how that goes. And if that goes well, then maybe that's a precedent for the more complicated technologies that you're interested in and that we're talking about today, I hope.
May I add something? I guess one way to go, and I live it by myself, this situation, is the hacker culture. I guess we are living the democratization of robotics. Nowadays, students around the world, even in high schools, they have access to 3D printers, for instance. I'm not saying that it's general, but it's more and more common these days. And I can say, for instance, when I was doing my PhD, we built a robot with a 3D printer. A very basic 3D printer, took months and months, but it was possible. And the first prototype that we did of the social interface of the robot that we are developing as a company in Mexico, it was also made in a 3D printer. Of course, there are limitations, but talent is everywhere. Potential developers are everywhere. Social scientists and psychologists are everywhere. It's just to put the right resources in the right moment, in the right place, and amazing ideas spark in that field. So, yeah, I can suggest, from my personal experience, this hacker culture, I guess, it's a potential way to develop new ideas, new technologies.
I mean, it's like, as we know, in Kenya, M-Pesa, the payment system on mobile phones, has really leapt forward in ways that it wasn't possible in the West, because it filled a need and it was accessible and easy to do. So I'm hopeful rather than pessimistic.
Karen.
Hi, I'm Karen Fisher. Thank you very much. I really liked the way that you started with sci-fi, Eduardo. And so far we've mainly been talking about robotics as something out there. Can you each talk to us a bit more about the ethics and opportunities around robotics that have become part of our bodies? Mm-hmm. So whereas I'll think of my artificial hip as just part of me, what happens when that becomes robotic?
Right. Well, not sure if I have the expertise to talk about that, but I've used glasses, right? So it's giving me kind of extension capability to see the things in the right way, as it's supposed to see it. And I did bioelectronics and biomechanics when I was in the bachelor's program and so on. And to be honest, as engineers, we don't consider the ethical limits, the ethical boundaries. So we just do the things to see further away how long we can go, what is the limit. And I have been talking with the guys in the bionics department in UNSW. We catch up in one of these INT events, and yeah, we still have this mindset. But generally speaking, I can say that the limits are low. What by law can be possible and why cannot. I don't know. I remember an experiment that I was reading a few years ago about neuroeconomics. People studying the neurological process behind the decisions. And they did an experiment with this magnetic resonance, and in which through a decision game, they can influence the decision of the people, stimulating certain part of the brain. And that blows my mind, like, oh my God, like, what if they can do it in a small device and distance, and they go to the ONU meetings of the presidents of the world and so on, and they influence the decisions that they have. I don't know if it's likely. I don't know if it's really possible, but there is some research about that. And but yeah, I can say that at least my generation, or where I did my education, we were really not aware about these things, and definitely we should be aware. The new generation of scientists and researchers should be. But I guess Tom has more to say about it.
No, I don't have anything intelligent to say. I mean, we're influencing people's behavior all the time, normally with alcohol. And I suspect in many negotiations, alcohol has proved a catalytic factor. I don't know. I think that you have an artificial hip, other people have artificial hearts, and I think that we get really worried when it comes to cognitive prosthetics, as it were, things that change the way we think. We know that there are brain implants now that help people with epilepsy. I have a friend, and he has a stimulator in his spine that stops him having neuropathic pain, or another one that makes it possible for him to pee normally rather than have his paralyzed sphincter that stops him peeing. So, more and more we will have these things. I think they're definitely coming. The question is, are they under our control or are they autonomous? And I think it's, if they're under our control, we're generally happy with them. And when they start becoming autonomous, we get ethical problems and anxieties. But it's certainly the case, and I'm glad again that Eduardo stressed the social scientists and the rest of it, that we need to have ethical scrutiny alongside the technological progress. We've already heard engineers just see a problem and want to fix it, and I'm not criticizing them, that's great, but that means that they need to do it with us. They need to do it with social scientists and ethicists, and also with polys, with political involvement, because these are essentially political questions. The one that we heard about who gets it, that's a political question. Who funds it, who pays for it, who profits from it, and how does it change the way that we interact and behave in the world? I mean, the enthusiasts, the transhumanists feel that we're all going to be better off for it. But I mean, when I come to ethics, I'm still reading Aristotle from thousands of years ago. So I don't believe that our ethical thinking has progressed a whole lot further.
The interdisciplinary nature of what you're talking about is exactly what the Disability Innovations Institute is planning to do. And as you just said, Tom, it's not just, sociologists, psychologists, roboticists, tech developers, important, but also what's the policy framework, what's the regulatory framework we put around that can both ensure that technology is diffused, but also limit harms on people. Eduardo, I just wondered if you wanted to respond at all to the point about autonomous technology and whether that is a long way to the top of that as well in terms of robotics in us.
In terms of autonomous robots, for social companion, for social purposes, I guess, still we are very complex beings, right? Like as a humans, we have a lot of needs, a lot of thoughts, feelings, emotions, and all these considerations that it's really difficult to implement in a machine, in a artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence are very, very good in one thing and just one thing. And when you try to use the same algorithms to generalize if it's good doing other thing in another field and so on, they just break. So if you try to implement that in a machine that is capable to do things in the physical world, that will be a disaster, right? Like you don't want autonomous robots that are not capable to do right decisions in the real world because they present potential harm to the users. So I'm always skeptical. I don't want to raise expectations higher because media is very good doing that. As a researchers, we should be responsible of going step by step, little by little, try and error, and if it's a big error, go back, and again, and it's what I try to do in my research, like try to not do overgeneralizations and try to be consistent and solid in what I do.
I mean, when we're thinking of AI, I think it was in Australia that for people who are receiving state welfare benefits, the AI went a little bit off the rails and sent everybody overdue or debt payment reminders. And that was not under the control of humans. That was on its own accord, upsetting a whole lot of people and causing a whole lot of problems. So I think we're some way from the truly autonomous, and we still need human oversight to make sure that it doesn't do the wrong thing. And if that's the case with something as frankly simple as accounts, then it must be even more the case with any of the more interesting applications we're talking about.
Well, we are out of time, so we're going to have to wrap up. If you can join me in thanking Tom and Eduardo. And the Disability Institute.
Thank you. And we're still looking for a robot dog, Graham. We'll tell you when we find it.
And I'd just like to thank Gemma for chairing today's session, and I'd like to thank you all for attending. It's been a very interesting discussion, and it won't be the last discussion that we have. Thank you very much.